storm arrived with the fury of divine judgment, lashing against the ancient stones of Ravenscroft Manor as though seeking penance for sins long buried. Lightning illuminated the towering Gothic spires, casting grotesque shadows across the moor, while thunder rolled through the valleys like cannon fire, a sound that made Sebastian Ravenscroft's jaw tighten involuntarily. From his study window, the Duke of Ashbourne watched the tempest with the detached fascination of a man who had witnessed far worse storms, both natural and human. When the carriage appeared through the driving rain, its lanterns flickering like dying stars, Sebastian felt an inexplicable stirring in his chest. The vehicle struggled against the wind, wheels cutting deep furrows in the muddy drive before finally drawing to a halt before the manor's imposing entrance. A woman emerged, cloaked, mysterious, moving with a grace that seemed to defy the chaos surrounding her. "Miss Grey, I presume," he murmured to the darkness, though something in her bearing whispered of secrets that ran deeper than assumed names. She paused at the threshold, her face obscured by shadow and hood, yet even from his distant perch Sebastian felt the weight of her gaze as it swept across the manor's facade. When their eyes met through the rain-streaked glass, a moment suspended between lightning flash and thunder's roar, something ancient and undeniable sparked between them, a recognition that transcended reason. Sebastian retreated from the window as though burned, his reflection fracturing across the glass like his carefully constructed composure. The study enveloped him in familiar shadows, leather-bound volumes that spoke of duty, mahogany surfaces that gleamed with the weight of responsibility, and always the portrait above the mantelpiece that haunted his sleepless nights. Margaret. Sweet, innocent Margaret, who had died bringing forth his heir that never drew breath. The physician's words still echoed in the chambers of his memory. "Sometimes, Your Grace, the heart simply cannot bear the strain." But Sebastian knew better. He was the strain, the curse that transformed love into tragedy, hope into devastation. What use is love to a man who buries all he touches? The words fell into the silence like stones into a well, disappearing into depths he dared not fathom. Thomas appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. The old steward had served 3 generations of Ravenscrofts, and his loyalty ran deeper than bloodlines. "The new governess has arrived, Your Grace. She appears quite refined." They all appear refined, until circumstance reveals their true nature. Sebastian's fingers traced the rim of his brandy glass, the crystal singing a melancholy note. "See that she is settled appropriately. The children will meet her tomorrow. Forgive me, Your Grace, but perhaps it is time." "Time for what, Thomas?" "To rejoin a society that whispers of my cursed touch. To subject another innocent to the darkness that follows in my wake." Sebastian's laugh held no humor. "I am a duke, not a man. Titles require no hearts." Thomas's silence spoke volumes, his eyes holding the gentle reproach of one who had witnessed too much sorrow. "The children ask for their uncle daily. Young Charlotte speaks of loneliness, and Master Henry grows wild without proper guidance. Perhaps this Miss Grey might bring light where shadows have lingered too long." As if summoned by their conversation, the storm's fury intensified, rattling the ancient windows. Sebastian contemplated the irony, a governess arriving in tempest, like some harbinger of change. He was neither prepared for nor desired. Lady Evelina Harcourt, though she must never think that name again, stood in the modest chamber assigned to the governess, her trembling fingers working to remove the sodden cloak that had been her shield against more than mere rain. The looking-glass reflected a stranger, hair darkened by moisture, cheeks pale with exhaustion, eyes that held depths of experience no mere governess should possess. 6 months ago she had been Lady Evelina, daughter of Viscount Harcourt, with prospects and position. 6 months ago she had believed in love, in honor, in the fundamental goodness of gentlemen who spoke of devotion beneath moonlit terraces. "Forgive me, my darling Evelina, but circumstances have altered." Lord Pemberton's words still cut like glass through her memories. "Your father's debts, the scandal. Surely you understand a man in my position cannot. The word that had shattered her world, revealed the hollow nature of promises whispered in alcoves, exposed the cruel mathematics of society, where love yielded to ledgers. Her mother's voice echoed from their final conversation. "The Harcourt does not bow to circumstance, dearest. We find another way. Then I shall rise above it, Mamma, even if hidden behind another name." Evelina had lifted her chin with inherited pride, though her heart bled with each word. "Miss Grey shall provide where Lady Evelina cannot. The children of this house will receive an education worthy of their station, and we shall survive with dignity and tact." The deception tasted bitter as medicine, yet necessity had taught her to swallow far worse. She was no longer the naive girl who had believed in fairy tales. She was a woman who understood that survival sometimes required abandoning everything one had been to become what circumstances demanded. Thunder crashed overhead, and Evelina pressed her palms against the window, watching lightning illuminate the grounds. Somewhere in this vast manor lived the Duke of Ashbourne, a man whose reputation preceded him like winter wind. Cold, they said, remote, haunted by tragedy and suspicious of all who sought to breach his carefully constructed solitude. Perfect, she thought grimly. A man who expected nothing would discover nothing. Miss Grey would tend his niece and nephew with competent anonymity, earn her modest wage, and disappear into the safety of invisibility. Yet as she unpacked her meager belongings, her fingers found the locket she could never abandon, her grandmother's locket bearing the Harcourt crest. Some things, she realized, were impossible to leave behind, no matter how deeply one buried the truth. Morning arrived with reluctant grace, storm clouds retreating to reveal grounds transformed by rainfall into gleaming splendor. Evelina made her way to the nursery, her steps measured and purposeful, every inch the proper governess in her modest gray dress and severely pinned hair. Yet beneath the careful disguise, her heart hammered with anxiety. Charlotte and Henry Ravenscroft proved to be delightful children. She aged 9 with her mother's golden curls and precocious intelligence. He aged 7 with serious dark eyes that seemed far too old for his years. Within moments they had accepted Miss Grey with the easy affection of children starved for attention. "Uncle Sebastian never smiles anymore," Charlotte confided, as they settled around the lesson table. "Aunt Beatrice says he has forgotten how." "Perhaps," Evelina suggested gently. "He simply needs reminding that joy exists." It was then that footsteps echoed in the corridor, measured, authoritative, approaching with the inevitability of judgment. The door opened, and Evelina's carefully constructed composure threatened to crumble. The Duke of Ashbourne commanded attention without effort. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of a man accustomed to absolute authority, he possessed the dark handsomeness that poets celebrated and mothers warned their daughters against. His eyes, deep blue as midnight storms, swept the room with calculating precision before settling upon her with uncomfortable intensity. "Your Grace." She rose, executed a perfect curtsy that spoke of breeding she prayed he would not recognize. "I am Miss Grey." Indeed, his voice carried the cultured tones of privilege. Yet underneath ran currents of something deeper, pain perhaps, or simply the weariness of a man who had ceased expecting joy from life. "A governess must know her place, Miss Grey. I trust you understand the importance of boundary." The words stung, though she had expected such reception. "I assure you, Your Grace, I know my place better than most." Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps, at her quiet dignity. His gaze lingered on her face with troubling intensity, as though searching for something just beyond recognition. When his attention dropped to the modest locket at her throat, her one weakness, her one retained connection to identity, Evelina felt her pulse quicken with alarm. "The children's education will proceed according to established curriculum," he continued, though his voice had lost some of its edge. "Latin, French, mathematics, proper deportment. Nothing unconventional. Of course, Your Grace. Though I believe education should also nurture curiosity and independent thought." Independent thought? A ghost of humor touched his lips. How refreshingly optimistic. Charlotte tugged at his coat sleeve. "Uncle Sebastian, Miss Grey knows ever so many stories. She promised to teach us about ancient Rome." For a moment the Duke's stern mask slipped, revealing gentleness that transformed his entire countenance. Did she indeed? "And what does Miss Grey know of ancient Rome?" Evelina met his challenge steadily. "Enough to bring Caesar's victories to life, Your Grace and Cicero's oratory to inspire young minds toward excellence." The silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken questions and dangerous possibilities. Finally, Sebastian nodded curtly and withdrew, but not before casting one last, searching glance at her locket, a look that sent ice through Evelina's veins. She was playing with fire, she knew. But sometimes, survival demanded risking the flames. Days settled into careful routine, each one a delicate dance between duty and deception. Evelina threw herself into the children's education with passionate dedication, finding solace in their eager minds and innocent affection. Charlotte proved remarkably quick with languages, while Henry displayed an unexpected aptitude for mathematics that delighted his governess. Yet always, she remained aware of the Duke's presence, his footsteps in corridors, his shadow passing library windows, his occasional appearances that left her pulse racing with dangerous awareness. Sebastian Ravenscroft was not a man easily ignored, despite his attempts at emotional isolation. It was during a history lesson that she first sensed his observation. Speaking of the Battle of Hastings, she had become animated, her natural enthusiasm breaking through governess propriety as she described William's tactical brilliance. Only when Charlotte giggled did Evelina realize her audience had expanded. Sebastian stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable yet somehow less forbidding than usual. "Pray continue, Miss Grey. Your account of Norman's strategy is illuminating." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I fear I become rather spirited when discussing history." Spirited. He tested the word as though it were foreign to his vocabulary. How unusual in a governess. Knowledge should ignite passion, should it not? How else can we inspire learning? Something shifted in his gaze. Interest, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit buried beneath layers of careful control. Indeed, though passion can prove dangerous when improperly directed, the words hung between them, laden with meaning that had nothing to do with education. Evelina felt her breath catch, awareness crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. "Children," Sebastian said suddenly, his voice rougher than before, "you may take your refreshment in the garden. Miss Grey and I require discussion regarding your curriculum." Alone, the nursery seemed smaller, intimate in ways that made Evelina's skin prickle with awareness. Sebastian moved to the window, his profile stark against the afternoon light. "You speak as one educated beyond typical governess expectations," he observed quietly. "Your accent, your knowledge, your bearing suggest refinement uncommon in your profession." Panic fluttered in her chest. "I was fortunate in my education, Your Grace. My previous employer valued learning." "Previous employer?" He turned, pinning her with that unsettling stare. "And yet you provide no references." "Sometimes," she said carefully, "circumstances require discretion." "Ah, discretion." His smile held no warmth. "What circumstances might require a genteel young woman to abandon her past so completely, Miss Grey?" The question struck too close to truth. Evelina lifted her chin, drawing upon reserves of pride that no catastrophe could entirely diminish. "Perhaps the same circumstances that might cause a duke to retreat from society, Your Grace. We all carry burdens we prefer to bear in solitude." The silence that followed crackled with tension. Then unexpectedly Sebastian laughed, a sound rusty with disuse, but genuine nonetheless. "Duchess, Miss Grey. It seems my niece and nephew have acquired a governess with both learning and spirit. I pray they prove worthy of such exceptional instruction." As he departed, Evelina sank into her chair, hands trembling with reaction. She was walking a razor's edge, and with each encounter the blade grew sharper. This is the perfect place for our natural subscribe call to action. The rose garden had become Evelina's sanctuary, a place where Miss Grey could momentarily fade, allowing Lady Evelina to breathe beneath star-scattered skies. She had not expected to find Sebastian there, standing among the white roses, like some brooding hero from Gothic romance, his dark hair touched with silver in the moonlight. Before we continue with this tale of forbidden love and hidden identities, dear listeners, I hope you're as captivated as I am by the growing connection between our mysterious governess and the haunted Duke. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe for more historical romance adventures, because trust me, what happens next between Sebastian and Evelina will leave you breathless. He looked up at her approach, surprise flickering across his features. "Miss Grey, I had not expected, that is, the garden is rarely visited at this hour. Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace. I often find evening air conducive to reflection." She moved to retreat, but his voice stopped her. "Stay." The word emerged rough, almost pleading. "I mean, the garden is large enough for two troubled souls seeking solitude." Troubled souls. The phrase hung between them, an admission more revealing than any formal confession. Evelina found herself drawn forward despite every instinct screaming caution. "The roses are magnificent," she observed, touching a pale bloom. "They bloom despite the thorns. Perhaps the thorns remind us that beauty demands a price." His voice carried weight of personal knowledge. Everything lovely in this world requires blood for its creation. The cynicism in his tone sparked something fierce in her chest. "Surely you cannot believe that, Your Grace? Must beauty always be born of suffering?" He studied her face in the moonlight, his expression unguarded for perhaps the first time since her arrival. "Experience has taught me that whatever I touch withers, Miss Grey. Love becomes loss. Hope transforms to heartbreak. Perhaps it is better to admire beauty from distance, to appreciate the roses without grasping them. And yet," she said softly, stepping closer despite every rational thought, "roses left ungathered eventually fade regardless. Perhaps the risk of thorns is worth the brief joy of the bloom." "You speak as one who has known both thorns and blossoms." His hand lifted, almost touching her cheek before falling away. "What heartbreak taught you such philosophy, Miss Grey?" The question pierced her carefully maintained armor. For one dangerous moment, she wanted nothing more than to confess everything. Her name, her fall, her desperate masquerade. Instead, she drew upon the strength that had carried her through devastation. We all carry scars, Your Grace. The question is whether we allow them to prevent us from living. Living, he laughed, the sound holding more pain than humor. I had forgotten the distinction between living and merely existing. Perhaps, she whispered, it is not too late to remember. The space between them had somehow diminished until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the flecks of gold in his storm-dark eyes. Desire, dangerous, impossible desire, sparked between them like lightning seeking earth. Miss Grey, her name emerged as prayer, as warning, as desperate plea. Your Grace. She swayed toward him, drawn by forces beyond reason or propriety. Thunder rolled in the distance, breaking the spell. Sebastian stepped back abruptly, his mask of ducal reserve slamming back into place. The hour grows late. You should return to your chambers. Of course. Humiliation flooded her cheeks. Forgive my impropriety. But as she hurried toward the manor, she heard his voice, soft as summer wind. There is nothing to forgive, Miss Grey. The fault was entirely mine. The announcement of Lord Pemberton's masquerade ball struck Ravenscroft Manor like a lightning bolt. Charlotte clapped her hands with delight while Henry wrinkled his nose in disdain. But Evelina felt the world tilt dangerously on its axis. Uncle Sebastian says we may attend for 1 hour, Charlotte announced breathlessly. Miss Grey, you simply must come as our chaperone. I hardly think a governess belongs at Lord Pemberton's ball, Evelina managed, her voice steadier than her racing heart. Nonsense, declared Miss Beatrice. Sebastian's sharp-tongued aunt, who had arrived that morning with trunks and opinions in equal measure. The children require supervision, and surely even a governess owns suitable attire for such occasions. Evelina's mind reeled. Lord Pemberton, her former betrothed, the man who had abandoned her when scandal touched the Harcourt name. To appear in his ballroom, even masked, seemed like tempting fate beyond reason. Yet Charlotte's pleading eyes proved impossible to resist. Please, Miss Grey, we shall be ever so good, and you look quite elegant when you're not trying to appear so governess-like, Henry supplied helpfully. That evening, Evelina stood before her mirror in borrowed finery, a deep blue gown that Clara, her personal maid, had mysteriously procured. The dress transformed her from mousy Miss Grey into something approaching her former self, though the simple mask would hopefully preserve her anonymity. The ballroom blazed with candlelight and jewels, society's finest displaying their peacock splendor while musicians wove melodies that spoke of romance and possibility. Evelina kept to the shadows, watching Charlotte and Henry navigate their first formal social gathering with endearing mixture of excitement and nervousness. She was observing their dancing lesson when strong fingers touched her elbow. The lady appears to be without a partner. The voice was deep, cultured, hauntingly familiar yet distorted by his elaborate mask. Evelina turned to find herself facing a tall gentleman whose bearing screamed aristocracy, whose dark hair caught candlelight like captured starfire. I am merely chaperoning, sir. Dancing would be inappropriate. Tonight, all usual rules dissolve into masquerade's magic. He extended his hand with commanding grace. One dance cannot compromise a lady's reputation when her identity remains mystery. Before she could protest, Evelina found herself swept onto the dance floor, her body responding to his lead with treacherous recognition. He moved with fluid power, guiding her through the waltz with expertise that spoke of countless ballrooms, countless partners. Yet something in his touch felt familiar, dangerous, absolutely right. You dance beautifully, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear, like one born to ballrooms rather than other occupations. Heat flooded her cheeks. Did he recognize her? Was her disguise so transparent? You flatter me, sir. I speak only truth. There is something about you, your grace, your bearing, that suggests mysteries waiting to be unraveled. The music swelled around them, and Evelina allowed herself this one moment of stolen joy. In his arms she could almost believe herself Lady Evelina again, could almost forget the deception that governed her days. Perhaps, she whispered, some mysteries are best left unsolved. And perhaps, he countered, spinning her with dizzying skill, the greatest treasures are found only by those brave enough to seek truth beneath surface appearances. As the final notes faded, they stood breathless, still caught in the spell of the dance. His mask had shifted slightly, revealing a tantalizing glimpse of familiar jawline, and Evelina's heart nearly stopped. Sebastian? The name escaped before she could prevent it. His grip on her waist tightened. How did you? But Charlotte's voice cut through the moment like a blade. Miss Grey, Uncle Sebastian, we've been looking everywhere. The spell shattered. Sebastian's eyes widened with recognition and something approaching shock. But before he could speak, Evelina had melted back into the crowd, leaving him standing alone on the dance floor. staring after her with dawning realization. Rain lashed against the manor's windows with renewed fury, as though the very heavens sought to mirror the tempest raging in Sebastian's chest. He paced his study like a caged wolf, the memory of the waltz burning through his consciousness with relentless intensity. Miss Grey, his enigmatic governess, transformed into ethereal beauty beneath masquerade's magic. The woman who had haunted his thoughts for weeks had proven herself capable of even more dangerous enchantment, when freed from the constraints of her assumed position. But it was more than beauty that tormented him. During their dance he had glimpsed something that defied explanation, a familiarity that went beyond their brief acquaintance, a recognition that whispered of deeper mysteries. The way she had said his name, the shock in her voice when she realized his identity, suggested secrets that ran far deeper than a governess's modest deception. A knock interrupted his brooding. Thomas entered without ceremony, his weathered face creased with concern. "Your Grace appears troubled." Miss Grey attended Pemberton's ball. The words emerged more harshly than Sebastian intended. She danced, quite skillfully for a governess. Thomas's eyebrows rose. "Indeed? How unexpected." "There is something about her, Thomas, something that doesn't align with her claimed background. Her education, her deportment, even the way she moves. Everything suggests refinement far beyond her supposed station. And this troubles you because—" Sebastian whirled to face his old friend. "Because I find myself drawn to her. Against all reason, all propriety. I am attracted to a woman who may be perpetrating elaborate deception under my own roof." "Or," Thomas suggested carefully, "perhaps you are attracted to a woman whose circumstances have forced her to conceal her true nature. Not all deceptions spring from malicious intent, Your Grace. You think she is hiding something?" "I think," Thomas replied diplomatically, "that many people carry burdens they prefer to bear privately. The question is whether such burdens disqualify them from happiness." Before Sebastian could respond, commotion erupted in the corridor. Charlotte's voice, high with distress, echoed through the manor. "Miss Grey, Uncle Sebastian, come quickly." I found the children huddled in the nursery, Charlotte weeping while Henry stood pale and shaking. "There was lightning," Henry explained with forced bravery. "It struck the old oak and Charlotte was frightened." "Where is Miss Grey?" Sebastian demanded. "She went to check the damage," Charlotte sobbed. "But that was ever so long ago, and the rain is dreadful." Without hesitation, Sebastian strode into the storm, Thomas close behind. They found Evelina in the garden, soaked to the skin, struggling to secure a fallen branch that threatened the rose beds. Her hair hung in dark ropes around her shoulders, her modest dress plastered to her figure, yet she worked with determined grace that stole Sebastian's breath. "Miss Grey," he reached her in 3 strides, catching her arm as she swayed with exhaustion. "What the devil are you doing?" "The roses," she gasped, rain streaming down her face. "The branch would have destroyed them. You risked your safety for flowers. Beauty should be protected when possible," she replied, her eyes meeting his with fierce conviction, "even if the cost seems foolish to others." In that moment, drenched and defiant, she was magnificent. Sebastian felt something crack inside his chest. Some wall he had built against hope, against the possibility of feeling anything beyond duty and resignation. Without thought, he swept her into his arms, carrying her toward the manor while she protested weakly about propriety and appearances. But as they reached the entrance, her struggles ceased and she relaxed against his chest with a sigh that sounded suspiciously like surrender. "You are impossible," he murmured against her hair. "As are you, Your Grace," she whispered back. Recovery from her garden adventure required Evelina to remain in her chambers for 2 days, tended by Clara and fussed over by the children. Sebastian sent his personal physician to ensure no lasting harm, along with flowers from the very roses she had protected, a gesture that left her breathless with dangerous joy. When she finally returned to her duties, she found the manor buzzing with unprecedented activity. Miss Beatrice held court in the morning room, surrounded by correspondents and wearing an expression of grim satisfaction. "Ah, Miss Grey," the older woman declared without preamble. "How fortunate that you have recovered. His Grace requires discussion regarding the children's social education." Evelina found Sebastian in his study standing before the window with hands clasped behind his back. The morning light revealed the strong lines of his profile, the aristocratic bearing that had been bred into his bones across generations of privilege. "You wish to see me, Your Grace?" He turned, and she was struck anew by the intensity of his gaze. "Miss Beatrice believes the children would benefit from exposure to suitable society. She has arranged for several families to visit Ravenscroft, ostensibly to renew old friendships." "That sounds beneficial for Charlotte and Henry's development. Does it?" His smile held no warmth. "Or does it sound like my aunt's latest attempt to thrust eligible young ladies into my path?" hoping one might succeed where others have failed. Understanding dawned with uncomfortable clarity. She wishes to see you married. She wishes to see the ducal line secured. My personal preferences are irrelevant to such calculations. He moved closer, his voice dropping to dangerous softness. Tell me, Miss Grey, what are your thoughts on marriage? Do you believe it necessary for happiness? The question struck her like a physical blow. How could she answer honestly without revealing the wounds that still bled from Pemberton's betrayal? I believe, she said carefully, that marriage should be built upon mutual respect and affection. Arrangements made purely for convenience rarely yield contentment, and yet convenience often proves more reliable than affection. Emotions fade, Miss Grey. Duty endures. How terribly sad, she whispered, to believe that love is merely temporary inconvenience. Something flickered in his expression, pain perhaps, or longing quickly suppressed. Experience has taught me that whatever I love dies, Miss Grey. Perhaps it is kinder to all concerned if I content myself with duty alone. Before she could respond, footsteps announced Miss Beatrice's arrival, accompanied by a flutter of feminine voices. Sebastian, dear, our guests have arrived. Come meet Lady Pemberton and her charming daughters. The blood drained from Evelina's face. Lady Pemberton, Lord Pemberton's mother, a woman who would recognize Lady Evelina Harcourt instantly despite any disguise. Panic clawed at her throat as elegant figures swept into the study, Miss Beatrice performing introductions with obvious satisfaction. Your Grace, Lady Pemberton curtsied with practiced grace. How delightful to renew our acquaintance. May I present my daughters, Miss Catherine and Miss Elizabeth Pemberton. The young ladies simpered appropriately, their calculating gazes, assessing Sebastian's worth with mercenary precision. But Lady Pemberton's attention had shifted to Evelina, her eyes narrowing with the sharp focus of a woman who forgot few faces. And this is Miss Grey, the children's governess. Miss Beatrice supplied dismissively. Competent enough, though rather unremarkable. Evelina kept her gaze downcast, praying that submission might preserve her anonymity. But she felt Lady Pemberton's scrutiny like physical touch, searching, questioning, dangerously close to recognition. Grey, the older woman mused. How curious. You remind me of, but no. Surely it cannot be. The resemblance is quite striking, however. Governesses often share similar appearances, Sebastian interjected smoothly. Education tends to produce certain uniformity. His intervention saved her. But Evelina knew her time was running short. How long before someone connected Miss Grey to the fallen Lady Evelina? How long before her carefully constructed world collapsed entirely? That evening brought unexpected summons to Sebastian's private library, a sanctuary lined with leather-bound volumes and warmed by crackling fire. Evelina found him standing before his wife's portrait, his expression haunted with memories she could never share. You sent for me, Your Grace. He gestured to the painting without turning. Margaret, my wife, she died bringing forth our child, a son who lived barely an hour. I'm so sorry. The words felt inadequate, yet genuine sympathy colored her voice. Are you, or do you merely offer expected condolences to your employer? He faced her then, his eyes holding depths of pain that made her heart ache. You see, Miss Grey, I have noticed something troubling about you. Fear coiled in her stomach. Your Grace, you speak as one familiar with loss, with betrayal, with the particular pain that comes from discovering that those we trust are capable of devastating deception. He moved closer, each step deliberate as stalking predator. You comfort my niece and nephew with the skill of one accustomed to providing solace. You navigate social situations with instinctive grace that suggests extensive experience. I have been fortunate in my education. No. The word cracked like whip. You have been trained from birth for a life you no longer possess. The question that torments me, Miss Grey, is why? Evelina lifted her chin, drawing upon reserves of pride that no catastrophe had entirely destroyed. Perhaps some questions are better left unasked, Your Grace, and perhaps some truths are too dangerous to remain hidden. His hand moved to her throat, fingers tracing the delicate chain of her locket with touch that burned like brand. This bears a crest, Miss Grey. I glimpsed it at Pemberton's ball, saw it again during our dance. Tell me what noble family claims such a device. The world tilted. He knew. Somehow. Impossibly, he had pieced together fragments of truth that she had tried so desperately to conceal. I don't know what you mean. Don't. His thumb pressed against the hollow of her throat, feeling her rapid pulse. Do not insult us both with further deception. You are no governess, are you, Miss Grey? Or should I say, Lady Evelina? The name hung between them like drawn blade. Evelina felt the walls of her carefully constructed world crumbling, leaving her exposed and defenseless. How long have you known? She whispered. I suspected from the beginning. Your bearing, your accent, your unconscious assumptions about privilege and position, all spoke of nobility, but it was the locket that provided confirmation. The Harcourt crest is not easily forgotten, particularly when one has seen it displayed at countless social gatherings. Shame flooded her cheeks. Then you know everything. My father's debts, our family's disgrace, my reduced circumstances. I know enough. His voice gentled unexpectedly. What I do not understand is why you felt deception necessary. Why not simply request employment honestly? Because, she said bitterly, honest requests require references, background inquiries, social connections I no longer possess. Because Lady Evelina Harcourt is a scandal-tainted liability, while Miss Grey is merely competent anonymity. And what of Lord Pemberton? I assume his presence at the ball was not coincidental. The question reopened wounds she had thought healed. Lord Pemberton was once my betrothed. Until my father's debts became public knowledge, until association with the Harcourt name became social poison, understanding dawned in Sebastian's expression. He abandoned you. He chose preservation of his reputation over honor of his promises. Can you blame him? What man wishes to tie himself to disgrace? A man of honor, Sebastian said quietly, stands by his commitments regardless of external circumstances. Honor is a luxury afforded only to those with secure positions. Your Grace, some of us must choose between survival and sentiment. The silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken recriminations and dangerous possibilities. Finally, Sebastian stepped back, his mask of ducal reserve sliding into place. You will pack your belongings tonight. The carriage will be arranged for morning. The dismissal hit her like physical blow. She had expected it, prepared for it, yet the reality proved far more devastating than anticipation. Of course, Your Grace. I understand completely. Do you? His laugh held no humor. I doubt that very much, Lady Evelina. Dawn crept across Ravenscroft Manor like reluctant witness to heartbreak. Evelina folded her few possessions with mechanical precision, each garment a reminder of the life she must abandon once again. Charlotte and Henry had wept at news of her departure, their innocent confusion a knife twist in her already bleeding heart. The carriage waited in the courtyard, patient as death, while Thomas supervised the loading of her modest trunk. She had written letters to her mother, explaining the failure of her desperate plan, to the children, promising she would never forget their sweetness, to Sebastian, words that would never be sent but needed writing nonetheless. Miss Grey? Clara appeared in the doorway, her weathered face creased with sympathy. His Grace requests your presence in the library before departure. Evelina's heart hammered against her ribs. What further humiliation awaited? What additional punishment for her deception? She found Sebastian standing before the windows, his profile etched with exhaustion as though he had passed the night in sleepless contemplation. Morning light revealed new lines around his eyes, fresh shadows that spoke of internal struggle. Your Grace. He turned slowly, and she was startled by the raw pain in his expression. Before you leave, I feel compelled to. He stopped, running hands through his dark hair in gesture of frustration. Bloody hell, this is more difficult than anticipated. Your Grace. I owe you apology, Lady Evelina. My behavior last evening was unconscionable. You sought honest employment to support your family, and I responded with suspicion and cruelty rather than understanding. The unexpected words stole her breath. You had every right to dismiss me for deception. I had no right to judge you for choices born of desperation. His voice roughened with emotion. I, of all people, should understand the measures necessity demands. I have made my own compromises with honor when survival required it. Then why? Because I am a coward. The admission emerged like confession ripped from unwilling lips. Because you terrify me in ways I thought impossible. Because when I look at you, I see possibility I dare not embrace. Evelina stared at him, understanding dawning like sunrise after endless night. Sebastian, I have told myself that isolation is safety, that emotional distance prevents further tragedy. But these past weeks, watching you with Charlotte and Henry, seeing your kindness and strength, I have begun to question whether survival without joy constitutes living at all. He moved closer, his eyes burning with intensity that made her knees weak. You asked once if it was too late to remember the distinction between existing and living. Standing here now, facing your departure, I realize the answer terrifies me. What are you saying? I am saying. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. I am saying that I would rather risk heartbreak with you than face certain emptiness without you. But I have nothing to offer, she whispered. No dowry, no family connections, nothing but scandal and reduced circumstances. You have everything that matters. His lips brushed her forehead with reverence that stole her breath. You have courage, intelligence, compassion, and a heart brave enough to love despite betrayal. You have given my niece and nephew joy they had lost, brought laughter back to halls that had known only duty. Sebastian, his name emerged as prayer, as plea, as desperate hope she had not dared acknowledge. Marry me, Evelina. Not because duty demands it, not because society expects it, but because I cannot imagine drawing another breath in a world that does not contain your light. The proposal hung between them like miracle, too precious to touch, lest it dissolve into cruel fantasy. You cannot mean it. Your position, your responsibility, mean nothing without someone to share them. His mouth found hers, soft and desperate, and infinitely tender. I love you, Lady Evelina Harcourt. I love your strength, your pride, your determination to protect those you cherish. I love the way you challenge me, the way you see hope, where I see only shadow. And I love you, she whispered against his lips. The words emerging like long-held secret finally released. I have loved you since that first night in the garden, when you spoke of thorns and beauty and the prices we pay for both. 6 months later, spring transformed Ravenscroft Manor into Eden reborn. Cherry blossoms drifted like snow across emerald lawns while roses climbed ancient walls in glorious profusion. The gardens that had once symbolized Sebastian's isolation now bloomed with life, love, and the laughter of children who had discovered joy once more. Evelina, now the Duchess of Ashbourne, walked the familiar paths with her husband's hand warm in hers, watching Charlotte chase butterflies while Henry attempted to catalog every specimen with scientific precision. The boy's scholarly enthusiasm delighted his new aunt, while Charlotte's romantic nature found perfect audience in a woman who understood the power of fairy tales made real. Do you ever regret it? Sebastian asked softly, his voice carrying undertones of vulnerability that still surprised her. The choice you made? The life you accept? She turned to study his beloved face. No longer haunted, no longer closed against possibility. How can I regret the decision that brought me everything I never dared hope for? Even though society whispers of my cursed touch, even though some still speak of scandal regarding your past, especially then. She lifted their joined hands, pressing kisses to his knuckles. Let them whisper. We know the truth, that love requires courage, that happiness demands risk, that the most beautiful roses bloom despite the thorns. Charlotte's delighted shriek drew their attention as she discovered a family of rabbits near the fountain. Henry abandoned his scientific pursuits to join her wonder, both children glowing with the security of being cherished. They are healing, Sebastian observed, wonder coloring his voice. As are we all. Healing, Evelina agreed, and learning that broken things can become more beautiful when mended with love. As if summoned by their contentment, Thomas approached across the lawn, his weathered face creased with satisfaction that spoke of duties well fulfilled. In his arms he carried a bundle wrapped in finest linen. Their son, born just 3 weeks prior with his father's dark hair and his mother's determination. His young lordship grows restless, Your Grace, Thomas announced with gentle humor. I believe he wishes to inspect his domain. Sebastian accepted his heir with reverence that never failed to move Evelina's heart. The baby stirred, opening eyes that promised to match his father's stormy intensity, and Sebastian's expression transformed with wonder that remained fresh despite weeks of practice. Welcome to spring at Ravenscroft, my son, he murmured, pressing gentle kisses to the infant's brow. Here you will learn that beauty blooms eternal, that love conquers fear, and that even the most broken hearts can heal when tended with patient devotion. Evelina leaned against her husband's shoulder, watching their children born and chosen explore the gardens that had witnessed their own journey from deception to truth, from isolation to connection, from despair to joy beyond imagining. The manor that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter. The Duke, who had believed himself cursed, had discovered that love's touch brought not destruction, but restoration. And the Governess, who had hidden behind false names, had learned that true identity could never be concealed from hearts that recognized their match. As sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, the new Duke of Ashbourne drew his wife closer. Their son nestled between them while Charlotte and Henry planned tomorrow's adventures with infectious enthusiasm. What began in disguise, Evelina whispered, echoing words from their wedding vows, became truth no mask conceal. Love, Sebastian agreed, his voice rich with contentment that would have been impossible to imagine mere months before, steadfast and eternal. And in the gardens of Ravenscroft Manor, where roses bloomed, despite thorns, and hope flourished, despite shadow, their story continued, not as ending, but as glorious beginning of all the springs yet to come. Blood dripped from Catalina Moreau's fingertips onto the marble floor as she clutched the shattered porcelain vase, her heart hammering against her ribs while Count Alejandro Navarro's furious voice echoed through the grand salon behind her. The precious Ming Dynasty piece lay in ruins at her feet, 3 months' wages she didn't have, a debt that would seal her fate in the debtor's prison where her father had died screaming. Outside, the rain lashed against Castillo Sombra's towering windows, matching the storm brewing in the Count's dark eyes as he discovered the destruction. What Catalina couldn't know was that the man whose wrath she feared had been watching her for weeks, memorizing the graceful curve of her neck as she worked, the determined set of her shoulders that reminded him of someone he'd loved and lost. Tonight, as thunder crashed overhead and her blood stained his ancestral home, their carefully maintained boundaries would shatter as completely as the priceless vase, revealing truths neither was prepared to face. The accident had happened in an instant. Catalina had been polishing the salon's collection when the ladder beneath her wobbled treacherously. Her desperate grab for balance sent the vase tumbling, its destruction echoing through the castle like a death knell. Now she knelt among the fragments, her hands shaking as she tried uselessly to gather the pieces. "Leave it." Count Navarro's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Catalina's head snapped up. Through her tears, she saw him standing in the doorway, tall, imposing, his aristocratic features carved from shadow and lamplight. At 28, he possessed the kind of austere beauty that made serving girls whisper and noble ladies swoon. But Catalina had learned to fear that face, to read the storms that gathered in his midnight eyes. "My lord," she began, struggling to her feet. "I said leave it." He stepped into the room, his movements predatory and controlled. "How much is it worth, do you think?" The question was a trap. Catalina's throat constricted. "I don't know, my lord. 300 gold reales." His voice remained conversational, almost pleasant. "Purchased by my grandfather in the Orient. Irreplaceable." Catalina's knees nearly buckled. 300 reales. More money than she would earn in 5 years, even if she worked every day until her fingers bled. "My lord, please what?" He circled her slowly, like a predator studying its prey. "Please forgive the debt. Please pretend this never happened. Please ignore that you've destroyed something priceless through your carelessness." "I'll work," she whispered desperately. "I'll work without wages until it's paid." "You'll what?" He stopped directly before her, close enough that she could smell the sandalwood and bergamot that clung to his clothes. "You already work 16 hours a day. Shall I make it 18, 20? The cruelty in his tone made her flinch. This was the Count Navarro the servants whispered about. Cold, ruthless, capable of destroying lives with a word. Yet something flickered in his eyes that gave her pause. Not cruelty, but something deeper. Something that almost looked like pain. "Send for the magistrate," he commanded the butler, who had appeared in the doorway. "Have him draw up the debt papers." "No," the word tore from Catalina's throat. "Please, my lord, not the prison. I have a sister. She's only 14. Without my wages, she'll starve." For a heartbeat, something shifted in the Count's expression. Then his mask slammed back into place. "You should have considered that before you climbed that ladder like a reckless child." "It's past midnight," the butler ventured carefully. "Perhaps the magistrate could be summoned tomorrow." "Now, Rodolfo." The Count's voice brooked no argument. "I want this matter settled tonight." As the butler departed, Catalina sank to her knees again, not caring about the porcelain shards that bit through her skirts. 6 months ago, she had been desperate enough to accept work at Castillo Sombra, despite its reputation. The previous Count had been a monster, they said, and his son was rumored to be worse. But the wages were triple what she could earn elsewhere, enough to pay for her sister Elena's medicine and keep them both fed. "Get up!" The command was sharp. Catalina remained kneeling, her head bowed. If these were to be her last moments of freedom, she would use them to memorize Elena's face, to prepare herself for the darkness ahead. "I said get up!" Suddenly, strong hands seized her arms, hauling her to her feet with surprising gentleness despite the harshness of his voice. Standing, she was forced to meet his gaze. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the tension that held his powerful frame rigid. When had she stopped thinking of him as merely the distant, terrifying master of the house? When had she begun to notice the way he moved through his ancestral home like a ghost? The loneliness that seemed to emanate from him like cold. "You're bleeding," he said abruptly, his grip tightening on her arms. Catalina glanced down. Blood from her cut hands had stained the pristine white of his shirt cuffs. "I'm sorry, my lord. I'll pay for the laundering." "Enough." His voice had gone strangely hoarse. Just enough. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they stood frozen. The storm outside seemed to pause, waiting. Then footsteps echoed in the corridor, and the Count released her so quickly. She stumbled. The magistrate, a thin man with calculating eyes, entered with his ledger and quills. "My lord, you have need of debt papers." "Yes," but the Count's gaze remained fixed on Catalina's bloodied hands. The servant has destroyed property valued at 300 reales. A substantial sum. The magistrate's eyes gleamed. Shall I prepare the standard terms? Debtor's prison until the sum is worked off. No. The word emerged before the count seemed to realize he'd spoken it. Everyone in the room turned to stare at him. Catalina felt her heart stop, then race again with desperate hope. My lord. The magistrate looked confused. Count Navarro straightened, his aristocratic mask sliding back into place. She'll work off the debt here. As my personal servant. The debt will be deducted from her wages at a rate of 5 reals per month. Catalina's mind reeled. At that rate she would be bound to Castillo Sombra for 60 months. 5 years of servitude. It was a kind of prison, but one that would allow her to continue sending money to Elena. That's highly irregular, the magistrate protested. Personal servants to unwed noblemen, the implications. Are you questioning my honor? The count's voice had gone deadly quiet. The magistrate paled. Of course not, my lord. I merely suggest, then draw up the papers as I've instructed. She'll serve as my secretary, organizing correspondence and managing household accounts. Nothing improper about that, surely? As the magistrate reluctantly began writing. Catalina stared at her new master in bewilderment. Secretary work was usually reserved for educated men of good family, not serving girls. Why would he offer her such a position? You can read, can't you? The count asked, as if sensing her thoughts. Yes, my lord. My father was a teacher before. She stopped, not wanting to mention the scandal that had destroyed her family. Before what? Before he was falsely accused of theft and died in prison, she finished quietly. Something flickered across the count's features, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. I see. The papers were completed with efficient brutality. Catalina signed her name with a trembling hand, sealing her fate for the next 5 years. As the magistrate departed with his fee, she found herself alone with the count once more. Your quarters will be moved to the east wing, he said without looking at her. You'll begin tomorrow at dawn. Rodolfo will explain your duties. My lord, she ventured carefully. Why didn't you send me to prison? Why offer me secretary work when I'm only a servant? His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, his carefully constructed facade cracked. She glimpsed something raw and vulnerable beneath, something that made her breath catch. Because, he said quietly, someone once showed mercy to me when I deserved none. Perhaps it's time I returned the favor. Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and strode from the room, leaving her standing among the scattered remains of the vase that had changed everything. Dawn came too soon to Castillo Sombra, painting the ancient stones with pale gold light. Catalina had spent the sleepless night in her new quarters. A small but comfortable chamber in the east wing, far grander than the servants' dormitory she'd shared with 6 other maids. The room held a writing desk, a proper bed, and windows overlooking the castle's private gardens. As she dressed in the dark blue gown that had been left for her, simple but well made, marking her new status somewhere between servant and lady, Catalina tried to understand the strange turn her life had taken. Count Navarro's mercy felt like a double-edged sword. She was saved from prison, but bound to him more completely than any chains could accomplish. At precisely 7, she knocked on the door to his private study. Enter. The room was masculine and austere, its dark wood paneling lined with maps and hunting trophies. The count sat behind an enormous desk, already dressed and reviewing correspondence. In the morning light she could see him more clearly than ever before. The premature silver, threading his black hair, a scar along his left temple. The way his broad shoulders seemed to carry invisible weight. You're prompt, he observed without looking up. Good. We have much to accomplish. Thus began Catalina's new existence. The count, she discovered, maintained extensive correspondence with business associates, political allies and estate managers across Spain. Her task was to organize this correspondence, prepare responses for his review and manage the complex accounts that tracked his various investments. It was work that required intelligence and discretion, qualities that had gone unnoticed during her months as a serving maid. Now, as she sorted letters and calculated figures, Catalina felt her mind awakening from the stupor of mindless labor. Her penmanship is excellent, the count remarked after reviewing her first batch of copied letters. Where did you learn? My father taught me, she replied, not looking up from her ledger. He believed education was the only true nobility. Wise man, his voice carried an odd note. What else did he teach you? Catalina hesitated. Speaking personally with the count felt dangerous, like stepping too close to a fire. Mathematics, history, some Latin. He said knowledge was a treasure no one could steal, yet they stole his reputation. The quiet statement made her pen still. She had not expected him to remember, much less comment on her father's disgrace. They stole his life, she corrected softly. The reputation mattered less than the truth. When she finally looked up, she found the Count studying her with unsettling intensity. And what was the truth? That he discovered Mayor Herrera was embezzling funds meant for the village school. When he tried to report it, Herrera accused him first. Who would believe a schoolmaster over the mayor? You sound as though you don't expect justice from the world. Catalina returned to her writing. Justice is a luxury for those who can afford it, my lord. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the scratch of her pen and the distant sounds of the castle waking to life. When she finished the letter, she found the Count still watching her, his expression unreadable. Take dictation, he said abruptly, rising to pace before the windows. Catalina positioned her pen, waiting. To His Excellency, Governor Martinez of Castile, the Count began, his voice taking on the formal cadence of official correspondence. I write to request investigation into financial irregularities in the village of San Rafael, specifically regarding the misappropriation of educational funds by former Mayor Carlos Herrera. Catalina's pen froze. She looked up in shock to find the Count watching her reaction. Continue writing, he commanded softly. With trembling fingers, she transcribed his words, a formal complaint that laid out her father's accusations in detail, complete with dates and amounts that could only have come from official records. Records that someone of the Count's influence could access. When the letter was finished, she set down her pen and stared at him in bewilderment. My lord, why would you? Because your father was right, he interrupted. Herrera has been stealing from 3 villages under my protection. The investigation was already underway. Your father's case merely provided additional evidence. But this means, it means his name will be cleared posthumously. It means Herrera will face justice. And it means the position of magistrate for the San Rafael district will soon be vacant. A position your sister might one day be eligible for with proper education. Catalina felt tears threatening. I don't understand. Why would you care about justice for a dead schoolmaster's family? The Count turned back to the window, his profile etched against the morning light. Because I know what it feels like to be falsely accused. I know the taste of injustice, the weight of undeserved shame. Before she could ask what he meant, he gestured to another stack of correspondence. We have work to finish. The morning is advancing. Over the following weeks, Catalina settled into her new role with surprising ease. Her quick mind and careful attention to detail made her invaluable to the Count's complex affairs. She learned that his wealth came not from inherited lands alone, but from shrewd investments in shipping, mining, and overseas trade. He was, she realized, far more intelligent and progressive than his cold demeanor suggested. Their daily interactions followed a careful pattern, professional, courteous, strictly bounded by their respective positions. Yet sometimes, when she looked up from her work, she would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. And sometimes, when she brought him his evening brandy, their fingers would brush as he took the glass, sending unexpected warmth shooting through her veins. It was during their 3rd week working together that the first letter arrived. Catalina recognized the expensive parchment and elaborate seal immediately. Correspondence from the Duchess of Alba, one of the most powerful women at court. As she placed it atop his morning correspondence, the Count's expression darkened. Read it aloud, he commanded after breaking the seal. My dear Alejandro, she began, then hesitated. The familiar use of his name felt strange on her tongue. Continue. I trust this letter finds you well at that dreary castle of yours. The Queen has been asking after you. Apparently your continued absence from court is causing comment. More importantly, my niece Isabella will be 18 next month. Her father and I believe it's time you considered marriage. The alliance would benefit both our houses, and Isabella is said to be quite accomplished. Catalina's voice faded as she reached the letter's end. The Duchess was proposing a marriage contract, complete with detailed financial arrangements and the promise of significant political influence. What do you think? The Count asked, his tone carefully neutral. The question surprised her. It's not my place to think about your personal affairs, my lord. I'm asking anyway. Catalina set the letter aside, choosing her words carefully. Lady Isabella is beautiful, well-connected, and would bring significant advantages to any marriage. That's not what I asked. She met his gaze directly, seeing something there that made her pulse quicken. You seem unhappy, my lord. I doubt a marriage arranged for political advantage would change that. And what would change it, in your opinion? The question hung between them, loaded with meanings neither dared voice. Catalina felt heat rise in her cheeks as she recognized the dangerous territory they were approaching. I wouldn't presume to know, she whispered. The Count leaned back in his chair, studying her face with unsettling intensity. Wouldn't you? Before she could respond, the study door burst open. Rodolfo entered, his usually composed demeanor shattered by panic. My lord, he gasped. Riders approaching under military banners. Captain Morales of the Royal Guard requests immediate audience. The Count was on his feet instantly, his face going pale. How many men? 20, my lord. Armed and bearing arrest warrants. Catalina felt the blood drain from her face. Arrest warrants could mean only one thing. Treason charges. Political disgrace. Possibly execution. Catalina. The Count's voice was sharp with urgency. The hidden panel behind the bookshelf. There's a passage leading to the old chapel. Take the correspondence marked with red seals. Burn everything else. My lord, what's happening? Someone has accused me of sedition. His laugh was bitter. It seems my reforms and progressive investments have been interpreted as disloyalty to traditional Spanish values. Understanding crashed over her. The Count's correspondence with foreign merchants, his investments in overseas ventures, his support for educational reforms, all could be twisted into evidence of treachery by those who opposed change. The red seals, she repeated, moving toward the bookshelf. Evidence of my actual loyalty, he said. Gathering documents with swift efficiency. Letters from the Queen herself, praising my service. Financial records showing my contributions to the royal treasury. They'll need to be preserved if I'm to prove my innocence. As Catalina triggered the hidden mechanism, the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a narrow stone passage. The Count pressed a leather satchel into her hands. Guard these with your life, he said urgently. If they take me, find a way to get them to the Duchess of Alba. She has the Queen's ear. They won't take you, Catalina said fiercely. You've done nothing wrong. Something shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps at her vehement defense of him. You sound as though you care what happens to me. The admission burst from her before she could stop it. I do care. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. Then the Count's hands were framing her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with devastating gentleness. Catalina, he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. Footsteps thundered in the corridor outside. The moment shattered as reality crashed back. Go, he commanded, stepping back. Now, she clutched the satchel to her chest. What about you? I'll face whatever comes. His smile was sad and beautiful. I've had practice at surviving false accusations. Before she could protest, he pushed her into the passage and sealed the panel behind her. Through the stone, she heard the study door slam open, heard Captain Morales' stern voice reading charges of sedition and treachery. In the darkness of the passage, Catalina pressed her ear to the wall and listened to the man she loved. Yes, loved, she could admit it now. Being arrested for crimes she knew he hadn't committed. The old chapel sat at the castle's eastern edge, abandoned for decades but still structurally sound. Hidden there, Catalina spent 3 desperate days waiting for news while surviving on the water and stale bread she'd found in the vestry. Through the chapel's broken windows she watched soldiers search the castle grounds, their torches moving like fireflies in the darkness. On the 4th morning, Rodolfo found her. My lady, he whispered, using the title that acknowledged her changed status in the household. I bring word from the capital. Catalina's heart hammered. Tell me. The Count has been imprisoned in the Torre de Madrid, awaiting trial for sedition. The charges include conspiracy against the crown, treasonous correspondence with foreign agents, and financial support of revolutionary activities. All lies, she breathed. Yes, but lies with evidence behind them. Someone has been very thorough in building this case. Rodolfo's weathered face was grim. The household has been disbanded. Most of the staff dismissed without references. Catalina clutched the satchel tighter. Inside were documents that could prove the Count's innocence, if she could get them to someone with the power to act on them. The Duchess of Alba, she said. I need to reach her. Rodolfo shook his head. Impossible. The Duchess has been recalled to her estates. Some say she too is under suspicion for her progressive views. Despair threatened to overwhelm her. If even the powerful Duchess couldn't help, what hope did a servant girl have? There is one possibility, Rodolfo continued reluctantly. The Queen herself will be in Seville next week for the Easter celebrations. If someone could reach her directly, I'll go to Seville. My lady, it's 3 days hard riding. You have no horse, no money for accommodations. I'll find a way. Catalina stood, decision crystallizing. The Count saved me from prison. Now I'll save him. Rodolfo studied her face, then nodded slowly. There's a horse in the stable, the chestnut mare. Take her, and take this. He pressed a small purse into her hands. It's not much, but it should buy food and lodging. That night, under cover of darkness, Catalina left Castillo Sombra behind. The leather satchel was secured beneath her cloak, its precious contents her only weapon against the forces arrayed against the man she loved. The road to Seville was treacherous in April, muddy from spring rains and crowded with pilgrims heading for Easter celebrations. Catalina pushed herself in the mare hard, stopping only when exhaustion threatened to topple her from the saddle. Each night she found the cheapest lodging available and counted her dwindling coins with growing anxiety. On the second day, disaster struck. At a river crossing swollen by recent rains, the mare stumbled on loose stones. Catalina was thrown clear, but watched in horror as the horse limped away, clearly lame. "Need help, señorita?" She turned to find a merchant with a loaded cart studying her predicament. His eyes held calculating interest that made her skin crawl. "My horse is injured," she said carefully. "Unfortunate." His gaze traveled over her travel-stained dress, noting its quality. "Perhaps we could arrange transportation. I'm bound for Seville myself." The implication in his tone was clear. Catalina clutched her cloak tighter, feeling the satchel's reassuring weight. "I can pay," she said firmly. "I'm sure you can." His smile was predatory. "The question is how much, and in what currency?" Before she could respond, another voice cut through the morning air. "The lady travels under my protection." Both Catalina and the merchant turned toward the newcomer, a young man astride a magnificent black stallion. He wore the blue and gold of the royal guard with captain's insignia on his collar. "The Captain Sandoval," the merchant muttered, his manner immediately becoming obsequious. "I was merely offering assistance." "How generous!" The captain's tone could have frozen wine. "I'm sure the lady appreciates your offer. However, she'll be traveling with my escort from here." The merchant departed with obvious reluctance. Captain Sandoval dismounted and approached Catalina with formal courtesy. "Are you injured, señorita?" "No, but my horse." She gestured helplessly toward the limping mare. "Leave her at the next village. The innkeeper will care for her until she heals." His dark eyes studied her face with uncomfortable perceptiveness. "You're traveling to Seville alone?" "Yes." "May I ask why?" "The roads aren't safe for unescorted women." Catalina hesitated. A captain of the royal guard could be ally or enemy. She had no way to know which. "Family business," she said finally. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition or suspicion, she couldn't tell which. "I see. Well, my men and I are bound for Seville. You're welcome to travel with us if you don't mind military company." It was an offer she couldn't refuse, though everything in her remained wary. "That's very kind, Captain." As they rode, Captain Sandoval proved to be intelligent and well-informed. He spoke of court politics with the easy familiarity of someone close to power, and seemed genuinely interested in her opinions on various subjects. "You're well-educated for a—" He paused, clearly trying to determine her station. "For a woman traveling alone?" she supplied. "I was going to say for someone so young. Your insights into political matters are quite sophisticated. I've had good teachers." That evening, as they made camp beside a stream, the captain approached her with wine and bread. "There's something I should tell you," he said, settling beside her with casual familiarity. "I know who you are." Catalina's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you mean." "You're Catalina Moreau, formerly in service at Castillo Sombra, currently wanted for questioning in connection with Count Navarro's treason trial." Her hand instinctively moved toward the satchel hidden beneath her cloak. "I've committed no crime." "I didn't say you had." His voice was surprisingly gentle. "But others believe you possess documents relevant to the case." "What documents?" Captain Sandoval smiled, and for the first time since meeting him, it seemed genuine. "The ones you're carrying in that satchel. The ones that could prove the Count's innocence." Catalina stared at him in shock. "How could you possibly—" "Because I was the one who warned him about the impending arrest." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Count Navarro is innocent of the charges against him. More than that, he's been working with a secret group of loyalists to root out actual sedition within the nobility." Understanding dawned slowly. "You're part of this group." "I am, and we need those documents to save not just the Count but several other innocent men who've been caught in this web of false accusations." Catalina studied his face in the firelight, searching for deception. "If this is true, why didn't you simply identify yourself earlier?" "Because trust must be earned, especially in matters of life and death." He leaned forward, his expression intensely serious. "The Count spoke of you often during our meetings. He said you were intelligent, brave, and completely trustworthy. Now I need to know, were his assessments correct?" The weight of decision pressed down on her. Everything she'd believed about her desperate mission was shifting, revealing new complexities she hadn't imagined. "The Queen," she said finally. "Will she really be in Seville?" "She will. But reaching her won't be as simple as walking up to the palace gates." Captain Sandoval's expression grew grim. "There are traitors close to the crown, people who've been feeding information to foreign agents, while accusing loyal Spaniards of the same crime. Getting evidence to the Queen will require careful planning." "Then we'd better start planning." His smile returned, warm with approval. "The Count was right about you. As they bent over maps in the firelight, working out the details of their approach to Seville, Catalina allowed herself to hope for the first time in days. Count Alejandro might yet be saved, and with him her own unexpected future. Seville during Easter week was a chaos of celebration and paranoia. The royal court had transformed the ancient city into a glittering stage for displays of piety and power. While beneath the surface, political tensions simmered dangerously. Captain Sandoval's men had secured modest lodgings near the cathedral, positioning themselves strategically for their mission. The Queen attends morning mass at the cathedral, Sandoval explained, as they reviewed their plans. Security will be heavy, but there's a moment during the processional when she traditionally accepts petitions from loyal subjects. Catalina nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. Everything depended on reaching Queen Isabella with evidence that could save Count Navarro's life. What if the traitors you mentioned recognize me? They won't be expecting a woman. Sandoval's expression was confident, especially not one disguised as a minor noblewoman, presenting a family petition. The disguise was elegant in its simplicity. A black mantilla to cover her distinctive hair, a pearl rosary to mark her status, and a formal gown borrowed from Sandoval's sister. In the mirror, Catalina barely recognized herself. You look the part, Sandoval assured her. Just remember, you're Doña Catalina de Mendoza, presenting evidence of your late husband's loyalty to the crown. The documents you carry prove his innocence of sedition charges. It wasn't entirely a lie, which made it easier to believe. The Cathedral of Seville was packed with courtiers, clergy, and common folk when they arrived for morning mass. Golden light streamed through stained glass windows, illuminating the magnificent altar where Queen Isabella would soon appear. Catalina positioned herself strategically near the aisle where the royal procession would pass. When the Queen appeared, Catalina's breath caught. Isabella was younger than expected, perhaps 25, with intelligent eyes and a bearing that suggested both piety and steel. She moved through the cathedral with graceful authority, acknowledging the bows and curtsies of her subjects. As the Queen approached, Catalina stepped forward with her petition raised. For a heart-stopping moment their eyes met across the space of rank and protocol. Your Majesty, Catalina said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. I beg you to hear evidence of loyal service wrongfully condemned. The Queen paused, her gaze sharp with interest. Behind her, court officials moved to intercede, but she raised a hand to stop them. What evidence? Isabella's voice was cultured. Curious. Documents proving Count Alejandro Navarro's true loyalty to your crown, Your Majesty. Evidence that he has been falsely accused by those who seek to hide their own treachery. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several courtiers pushed forward, their faces tense with alarm. Confirmation that some of the Queen's own advisors were involved in the conspiracy. Give me the documents, the Queen commanded. With trembling hands, Catalina extended the leather satchel. As Queen Isabella took it, their fingers briefly touched, a moment of connection that seemed to communicate understanding beyond words. I will review these personally, the Queen announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. If Count Navarro has been wrongly accused, justice will be done. But even as she spoke, Catalina saw movement in her peripheral vision. Two men in court dress were pushing through the crowd with obvious hostile intent. Their eyes were fixed on her with murderous purpose. Clearly she'd been recognized despite her disguise. Your Majesty, she called urgently. There are traitors here who... The attack came swift and silent. A blade flashed in the cathedral's golden light as one of the men lunged toward the Queen. Catalina reacted without thought, throwing herself forward to intercede. Pain exploded through her shoulder as the assassin's dagger found flesh. But her sacrifice allowed the Queen's guards to respond. Chaos erupted. Swords rang as Captain Sandoval and his men engaged the attackers. Screams echoed through the sacred space as courtiers fled or drew their own weapons, revealing the depth of the conspiracy. Through the melee, Catalina saw Queen Isabella standing firm, the precious satchel clutched in her hands, her eyes blazing with royal fury. Arrest them all, the Queen commanded as her guards overwhelmed the conspirators. I want to know every name, every connection, every detail of this plot against my crown. As the immediate danger passed, Catalina slumped against a marble pillar, her shoulder burning where the dagger had struck. Blood seeped through her gown, but she felt oddly triumphant. The documents had reached their destination. Count Navarro would have his chance at justice. You saved my life, Queen Isabella said, kneeling beside her with surprising informality. What is your real name? Catalina Moreau, Your Majesty. I serve Count Navarro as his secretary. Understanding dawned in the Queen's intelligent eyes.
Ah!
The woman who loves him.
Heat flooded Catalina's cheeks. Your Majesty, don't deny what's written on your face, child. The Queen's smile was unexpectedly warm. Love that drives someone to risk everything for another's honor. is rare and precious. Count Navarro is fortunate to inspire such devotion. Before Catalina could respond, Captain Sandoval approached with news. Your Majesty, we've captured the conspiracy's leaders. They've confessed to fabricating evidence against Count Navarro and 6 other loyal nobles. The plot reaches into the highest levels of court. Queen Isabella rose, her expression hardening into regal authority. Then it's time to clean house. Captain, I want those innocent men released immediately, and I want the real traitors to face the full penalty for treason. She turned back to Catalina. As for you, my brave secretary, you'll recover here in the palace while we sort out this mess. I suspect Count Navarro will want to thank you personally once he's freed. 2 weeks later, Catalina stood at the window of her palace chamber, watching carriages arrive in the courtyard below. Her shoulder had healed quickly, tended by the Queen's own physicians, and she'd been treated as an honored guest rather than a servant. But luxury couldn't ease the anxiety that gnawed at her as she waited for news from Madrid. A knock at her door made her turn. Enter. Captain Sandoval stepped inside, his expression unreadable. Behind him came another figure that made Catalina's breath catch. Count Alejandro Navarro stood in the doorway, alive and free, his dark eyes searching her face with desperate intensity. Prison had marked him. He was thinner, paler, with new lines of strain around his eyes. But he was unmistakably himself. I'll leave you two alone, Captain Sandoval said tactfully, withdrawing and closing the door behind him. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they simply stared at each other across the space of everything that had changed between them. You came after me, Alejandro said finally, his voice rough with emotion. You risked everything to save me. You saved me first, Catalina replied softly. From prison, from despair, from believing I was worth nothing more than cleaning floors. He crossed the room in 3 swift strides, his hands framing her face with the same devastating gentleness she remembered from that night in his study. You were never worth only that, he said fiercely. You're intelligent, brave, beautiful, loyal. Everything I never dared hope to find in this world. Alejandro, she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. I love you, he continued, his thumb stroking across her cheekbones. I fell in love with you watching you work with such fierce determination. I fell deeper watching you treat my correspondence like sacred documents. I fell completely when you defended me without hesitation, even when you thought I might be guilty. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I love you too. But we can't. The differences between us have been erased by everything we've endured together. His voice was certain, unshakable. The Queen herself has told me that my secretary showed more nobility in one act of courage than most of her courtiers display in a lifetime. She's offered to sponsor our marriage personally. Catalina's eyes widened. Marriage, if you'll have me. Alejandro's smile was uncertain, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. Not as your employer or your social superior, but as a man who loves you beyond reason and wants to spend his life proving worthy of your devotion. Instead of answering with words, Catalina rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss tasted of freedom and promise, of endings and beginnings intertwined. When they broke apart, both were breathless. Is that a yes? He asked, his forehead resting against hers. That's a yes to everything, she whispered. To loving you, to marrying you, to building a life where loyalty matters more than lineage. As sunset painted the palace walls with gold, Count Alejandro drew his secretary, his love, his future wife, back into his arms. Outside, the conspirators who had tried to destroy them faced royal justice. But in this chamber there was only truth, only love, only the promise of a future neither had dared imagine when their worlds first collided over a broken vase and spilled blood. 3 months later, the bells of Castillo Sombra rang out in celebration as Count Alejandro Navarro married Catalina Moreau in the castle's restored chapel. Queen Isabella herself attended the ceremony, her presence ensuring that no one would dare question the match between the noble war hero and his beloved secretary. As they spoke their vows before God and witnesses, Catalina thought of her father, finally vindicated and remembered with honor. She thought of her sister Elena, now enrolled in the finest school in Madrid, with her tuition paid by her noble brother-in-law. Most of all, she thought of the journey that had brought her from desperate servant to cherished wife, a path built on courage, loyalty, and love that had proven stronger than every obstacle placed before it. When Alejandro kissed her as his bride, sealing their union before the cheering crowd, Catalina knew that some fairy tales were real. They just required more courage to achieve than the stories ever mentioned.